Somewhere within a castle, a fierce clash unfolded as swords met in a relentless exchange. It was a battle between a hero and a demoness. Both were confused by what was happening. For the hero, the situation felt strange, while for the demoness, it was difficult to accept. Neither of them could understand why their weapons failed to break against each other. Each had believed that their own weapon was the most powerful. As they both stepped back, each carried the same question in mind. At the same time, they sought to ask it. The question was identical for both.
Who forged your sword?
When their attention shifted to the pommels of their weapons, where a marking had been carved, silence followed. The demoness came to a realization, recognizing the work of a stubborn blacksmith. The hero also understood, letting out a quiet breath as he reached the same conclusion. From the flow of their battle, the hero had come to understand that their strength was evenly matched. Continuing the fight with those weapons would not lead to a conclusion. The demoness reached the same understanding. There was no point in continuing the battle, and in that moment, they found rare agreement. For their generation, a truce became the only reasonable choice. It carried a quiet irony, as their decision was influenced by not wanting to provoke the blacksmith behind those blades. The demoness considered that the blacksmith may have already foreseen such an outcome, and that underestimating him would be a mistake. The hero accepted that thought, and with that, they parted ways. All of this came to pass because of a single figure, a legendary blacksmith. Yet before these events, that same individual had once lost his life. It began on the day he stepped forward to save a cat from an oncoming truck. That moment marked his end in his previous life, driven by nothing more than his fondness for cats. When he opened his eyes, he found himself floating. A voice reached him, asking if he was awake, noting that his soul appeared undamaged. Izo questioned who she was, and the girl explained that, simply put, he had died in that world. Izo recalled saving the cat. Looking at his hand, he came to the realization that he was dead, and he found himself wondering why he felt so calm. The girl explained that, under normal circumstances, his soul would have been broken down and stored as a new resource. However, she had placed that process on hold and slowed his spirit so the shock would not shatter his soul. She had witnessed him saving the stray cat before his death, and Izo acknowledged it. She then revealed that the cat had been her. The realization caught him off guard. She described herself as a watchdog, someone who moved between worlds with the role of observing them to ensure they did not negatively affect one another. In his world, she had taken the form of a cat to act as a lookout. She admitted that she had made a mistake and nearly died, but Izo had saved her. Izo considered this and thought it sounded like she held a high-ranking role, yet he questioned whether being hit by a truck would have truly killed her. The girl clarified that only her temporary body would die, and that loss would be temporary, having no real impact on the world itself. However, she explained that there was now a disturbance because Izo had died when he was not supposed to. To correct this, it had been decided that she would compensate him with another existence. Izo admitted he did not fully understand how it worked and wondered if it would be possible to simply erase the accident instead of going through something so complicated. The girl explained that such a solution would have been the simplest, but the problem was that she had already observed the event. What she had seen would be reported and recorded, making it impossible to undo. She apologized and stated that Izo's death could not be reversed. Izo came to understand that there was nothing more she could do. The girl then mentioned that a similar incident had occurred in another world. As a solution, she would exchange their existences, placing the other being in Izo's world and Izo in theirs. The idea surprised him, leading him to question whether that meant he would live as someone else. She acknowledged his understanding. Izo then settled on one remaining question, wondering why she was going out of her way to keep him alive. The girl admitted that she had made a mistake and that Izo had saved her. Because of that, she would feel uneasy if he were truly gone. She then explained that there was another reason as well. As a way to show her sincerity, or rather her gratitude, she decided to grant him a cheat for the world he would be sent to. Izo found himself wondering about this cheat. The girl clarified that it would be something like special knowledge or an ability that would make living in that world easier. Along with that, she would also prepare a house for him. She then asked what kind of life he ideally wanted. Izo reflected on his past. He had lived without family, completely on his own, spending his days working in a sweatshop-like company as a programmer. Before he even realized it, he had grown old, his hair turning gray. The only person who might notice his absence would be his boss, and even then, a replacement would be found quickly. As his thoughts moved, he realized there was nothing left tying him down. Still, he did not want to simply disappear. This felt like a second chance. He thought that it would be nice to make a living by creating things, since that had always been his hobby. The girl accepted this without hesitation, stating that it could be arranged. Izo then added that, although it had been accidental, he liked cats to the point that he would risk his life to save them. If possible, he wanted to live a slow and peaceful life surrounded by cats. The girl then asked what exactly he wanted to create. He considered it and realized he had always been interested in swordsmithing, though he had never been given the chance to pursue it. She agreed to this as well and granted him the experience and ability of a blacksmith. In addition, she included knowledge of language, general understanding of the world, some combat capability, and a small amount of magical power. A burst of light enveloped Izo, and in the next moment he was cast downward. He woke up in the middle of a forest. As he slowly sat up, pain spread through his entire body, accompanied by a splitting headache. Then a strange sensation suddenly stirred within his mind. Izo questioned what was happening to his head, his body, even his fingertips, as unfamiliar information began pouring into them. It became clear to him that this was the moment it truly settled in. His old life was completely over. He felt that things had begun to stabilize. Testing himself, he opened and closed his hand. His body now felt rebuilt, filled with unknown knowledge and experiences that were not originally his. The sensation was strange, almost like something had been installed into him. Nearby, he noticed a house. He recalled that the girl had mentioned preparing one for him. He approached it, opened the door, and stepped inside. Looking around, he observed a kitchen, a bedroom, ingredients, and various tools. Everything necessary for daily living seemed to be in place. He figured these supplies would last him for some time. However, there was no electricity, no running water, and no well, leading him to realize he would need to find a water source. Then he noticed another room nearby. Upon entering, he was taken aback. It was clearly a workspace, and all the materials and tools were already prepared. He picked up a hammer, and his hands and fingers moved with natural familiarity, as if they already understood how and when to use it. The realization came to him clearly.
I know it.
He understood now that this was the so-called cheat, along with the ability to use a small amount of magic. Soon after, hunger set in. Judging by the light, he assumed it was around noon and decided to sort out something for lunch. After eating, he planned to explore outside and search for a water source. He began preparing ingredients in the kitchen and got the fire ready. As he looked at his hand, he noticed with surprise that he could produce a small flame. It was too weak to sustain for long or reach high temperatures, but it was enough for ignition. With that done, he prepared to head outside in search of water. As he wandered through the forest, he spotted a green swirl, a clear reminder that he was no longer in his original world. He wondered what kind of forest this was and how vast it might be. He questioned whether there were any towns or villages nearby, realizing he had not been given much information about such things. In the end, he acknowledged that aside from his abilities, he knew almost nothing about this world. As he continued walking, he came across an herb and recognized it as a medicinal plant. He realized that knowing this must be part of the essential knowledge given to him, though it still felt strange to understand something he had never actually learned. He picked several of the herbs. At the same time, he noticed that both his mind and body were slowly adjusting to this new world. He walked farther and judged that the distance from the house was about 15 minutes on foot, which seemed like a reasonable daily exercise. Soon he found a source of fresh water. Looking at his reflection, he observed that his appearance had changed. The girl had made him slightly younger, just as he had requested, leaving him looking around 30 years old. He noticed fish in the water and realized that fishing was also an option. Not long after, he heard a rustling sound nearby. He wondered what it could be, sensing that something might be lying there. When he moved closer to check, he found a woman lying unconscious. As he approached and examined her condition, he saw that she was bleeding. Turning her over, he noticed a tail, which left him uncertain whether she was a person, a tiger, or some kind of beast woman. He understood that she would not survive unless he brought her back to his home immediately, so he carried her. As he did, her body reacted with pain, but he pressed on, knowing there was no time to waste. Back at the house, Izo located sewing tools. The only thing he still needed was cloth. He tore some fabric and used it to prepare bandages. Then he boiled water to sterilize a needle. He laid the woman on the bed and began examining her injuries. As expected, the most serious wound was the one on her stomach. Thanks to the knowledge he had been given, he knew exactly what needed to be done. Enduring the installation had proven useful. He used the sterilized needle and thread to stitch the wound. As he worked, the woman reacted to the sharp pain, but he continued carefully until it was done. After finishing, he fed her an herb. Afterward, her condition appeared to stabilize. He reflected that he had somehow managed to carry out first aid despite being only an amateur. He understood that if the wound left a scar, all he could do was accept it and feel apologetic. Izo considered the need for disinfection and reducing fever, and he was relieved that the herbs he had gathered earlier turned out to be useful. Fatigue soon caught up with him, and it became clear to him that this was now the world he would be living in. He began thinking about preparing for life as a blacksmith. There were still many things left to do, but since this was his second chance, he wanted to live at a slower and more relaxed pace instead of returning to a life of constant overwork. He figured that it might be best to start working the next day while continuing to check on her condition from time to time. He also realized that falling asleep would not be ideal, yet his exhaustion took over. He lowered his head onto the bed and drifted off. After some time passed, the woman climbed on top of him, marking the beginning of the next chapter of his life. The tiger woman suddenly grabbed his neck, and Izo quickly realized that there was no strength behind her grip. It became clear that she was not trying to kill him. He checked on the wound on her stomach. As her mood shifted, he remained calm. She indicated that it still hurt, though it was healing, which brought him a sense of relief. She then turned her attention to whether he had seen her body. Izo understood that he had no choice but to examine it in order to treat her properly, and he made it clear through his actions that he had not done anything beyond what was necessary. She leaned in and sniffed him, then held back, deciding to trust him for the moment, sensing no sign of deceit from him. Izo found himself unsure of what that meant, while she associated it with the way one's heartbeat reveals their state. He felt relieved that the situation did not turn awkward. He handed her some clothes and urged her to put them on. He explained that her previous clothes had been heavily soaked in blood, leaving him no choice but to cut them apart during treatment. Izo felt uncertain about their value to her and expressed a quiet apology, recognizing that he might not have understood how important they were. She accepted this without concern, regarding them as nothing more than worn-out rags. She then looked around and questioned whether this place belonged to him, which he confirmed. When she asked what he did there, Izo thought of calling himself a blacksmith, though in truth he had only settled there the day before. She observed him carefully and sensed no dishonesty, yet she noted that she did not recall there being a house in this part of the forest. Izo clarified that the house had already been there when he arrived. She considered this and mentioned that she rarely came to this side of the Black Forest, so it was possible she had simply overlooked it. The mention of the Black Forest stirred faint knowledge within him, something that had come from the installed information. He understood that this area lay to the east of the forest. She explained that she usually stayed around the northern or western parts, but the previous day, while resting in this area, she had encountered a large black bear. From there, everything had unfolded as it did. In the end, she recognized that if Izo had not found her, she would have been killed by it. Izo felt a sense of fear upon hearing about the dangerous creature in the forest. He realized how fortunate he had been not to encounter it the previous day. With that in mind, he wondered how long it would take for her injuries to fully heal. From what he understood, beastmen possessed bodies far stronger than those of humans. Even so, in her current state, hunting or exploring would be impossible for about 2 weeks. Izo then considered the idea of her staying in his house. The suggestion caught her off guard. He had only just arrived in this place and was already thinking of finding someone to assist with housework and blacksmithing. In exchange, he would provide shelter and food until she recovered, which seemed like a fair arrangement. She remained silent for a moment, thinking it over, before eventually accepting. Since he did not give off any suspicious feeling, she decided to stay until her injuries healed and she could move normally again. What would come after that could be decided later. Izo accepted that and felt there was no need to rush the matter. She showed a faint smile, settling into the idea that she would be under his care for the time being. He then asked for her name, and she revealed it to be Samya. To him, it sounded like a good name, though she personally did not like it, finding it lacking strength or charm. She would have preferred something that sounded stronger. Izo compared it to something like Gonzalez, which immediately made her burst into laughter, finding it strange and unexpected. Izo grew slightly irritated, yet he still believed that a name given by one's family naturally suited the person who carried it. That thought amused her, and the mood lightened for a moment. Izo then gave his own name as Izo Tanya. From what he understood, people like him, with similar features, were usually from the northern regions of this world. Samya found it unusual, as family names were rare, and such names were often tied to status or ownership of land. Starting a smithy in this way did not quite match that image. Still, Izo felt that it would be fine as long as she accepted things as they were. He preferred that she simply call him by his name, and she agreed to do so. After some time, Izo prepared to begin his work. He felt that the preparations were sufficient and decided to start by making a small knife. First, he lit a fire in the firebed. Then, he maintained the temperature until the charcoal was properly ignited. Using wind magic, he controlled the airflow to keep the ventilation steady, much like operating bellows. Since the fire was not too strong, he could manage it on his own, though the heat was still more intense than he expected. Once the temperature rose above 800 degrees Celsius, the steel began to change color, signaling that it was ready to be forged. Izo understood the process from the knowledge given to him, but this was his first time actually doing it. Thanks to the cheat, he could instantly recognize when the iron had reached the right condition. Even so, he found himself surprised, questioning whether this was truly his own ability. The strength behind each strike of the hammer felt unfamiliar. He recalled carrying Samya back to the house and fetching water earlier. Even when he was in his 30s before, he had never possessed this kind of strength. It became clear to him that his body had grown stronger. He planned to begin his afternoon work after Samya had eaten lunch and was resting. Moving on to the final steps, he shaped the iron, reheated it, and then cooled it. After that, he quenched it in water to strengthen the metal. He polished the blade with a file and finished by sharpening it on a whetstone. Step by step, Izo relied on the knowledge installed within him, turning it into real experience through his actions. His movements gradually aligned with the skills he had been given, guiding his body toward true mastery, which reflected clearly in the sharp form of the blade. After some time, the knife was complete. It was his very first creation. He then wondered what he should use it on and chose a bundle of vegetables. As he cut through them, he was taken aback. The blade sliced cleanly, even cutting into the board beneath. He was astonished by how sharp it was. None of the knives in the house compared to this. He began to question whether this was truly the effect of the cheat. A blade that cut this easily felt almost unnatural and dangerously effective. He thought it might be best to use it for self-defense and at least add a proper handle to it. It seemed clear to Izo that relying too much on the cheat caused the knife to become excessively sharp. A blade like that would be far too dangerous to sell in any market. With that in mind, he decided that the next day he would create 3 more knives, one sharper than the first, another slightly less sharp, and a final one that would be only barely sharp. He planned to have Samya test them first before deciding what to do. At that moment, she was still asleep. Izo gently woke her, letting her know that dinner was ready. She stirred, feeling that no matter how much she rested, it never seemed enough. Izo checked on her condition, noting that her wounds still required care and that she should avoid moving too much in order to recover her strength. As she noticed the object in his hand, she wondered if it was some form of magic, though he regarded it as something simple. He handed her the meal, knowing that while rest was important, proper food was just as necessary. She accepted it without hesitation. The dish consisted of simmered meat and vegetables. Izo was not particularly skilled at cooking, and this was about as much as he could manage. Even in this new world, he understood that he would need money to purchase food, firewood, and materials for his blacksmith work. By the next day, the knives were finally complete. He called Samya over to assist him. She agreed, though she was unsure how much help she could offer when it came to blacksmithing. Izo only needed her to test how well the knives could cut. He indicated the first one for her to try. She picked it up and began slicing vegetables. The moment the blade passed through, she was clearly impressed. Izo then directed her to try the next knife. She used it in the same way, cutting cleanly once again, and found herself even more surprised. From behind, Izo observed that the second knife made cutting easier. The difference caught her off guard, as the blade seemed to cut far too smoothly. He then guided her to try the last knife, the one he considered most important. She prepared herself and made the cut. The result left her visibly shaken by how effortlessly it sliced. Izo then had her try pulling it out. Samya reacted in confusion, unable to immediately understand what had just happened. Izo quickly told her to calm down, realizing that holding a knife in that state was dangerous. She apologized, and Izo brushed it off, acknowledging that he had not explained things properly beforehand. This confirmed his thoughts. The cheat he had been given allowed him to perform at the level of a first-class blacksmith. He began considering that if he wanted to sell his work, he would need to think carefully about how to present and handle his products. Samya then showed interest in the knife, finding it useful for hunting. Izo saw no issue with it and was willing to let her have it. Her reaction was immediate and bright, clearly pleased with the idea. Izo did not make much of it and assured her it was fine. He also planned to make a sheath for the knife, though it would take some time. With that settled, she returned to bed to continue resting. From this point, Izo began to form a clear plan for what to do next. By adjusting the quality, he could produce more knives at a level suitable for selling. Based on Samya's reaction, he had a good sense of what standard would work. His first step would be to create more knives and farming tools, then sell them to support himself. He had heard that beyond the forest there was a town with a lively market on weekends. With that in mind, his blacksmithing life began. After changing the bandage on her wound, Samya showed clear gratitude. Izo checked on her condition, and she indicated that while she was not ready to go hunting yet, she was feeling better than before. Izo then suggested that they head to town that day. It had already been a week since he started making knives, and he had also tried crafting a few other tools. With enough items prepared, they were now on their way to sell them. The standard version of his knife, which he referred to as Model Number 1, could be produced in large numbers since it was quick to make. By this point, Samya had nearly fully recovered. They had even begun taking walks together, during which she shared knowledge about the forest and its ecology. Izo found it useful to combine that with the knowledge he had been given, allowing him to better understand what was around him. He had been concerned about encountering dangerous creatures like wolves or wild boars, but nothing had appeared. Samya believed it was because Izo gave off a strong presence, which kept such threats away. Still, Izo found it difficult to fully accept that, considering she was the stronger one between them. In his thoughts, he remained aware that even if he did not fully understand the limits of his abilities, there were surely creatures in the forest that were far more dangerous than him. It took about 2 hours of walking through the forest to reach the main road, and another hour from there to arrive at the town. It likely helped that Samya was a beast man, as they encountered neither dangerous creatures nor bandits along the way. After some time, Samya pointed out the town ahead. Just outside the walls lay the marketplace they were heading toward. The idea of starting a small business outside the town walls felt exciting to Izo. He realized that setting up there meant he would not have to worry about entrance or exit tolls. As they approached, a man nearby called out to them. When they turned, they saw that it was a guard. He approached and questioned them. Izo responded with a composed expression shaped by years of experience in dealing with people. The guard noted that he had not seen them around before and asked about their purpose. Izo presented himself as a blacksmith who intended to sell knives at the market. The guard then asked to inspect one. Izo allowed it without hesitation, and after examining the blade, the guard found no issues. With that, Izo and Samya continued on, reminded by the guard to avoid causing any trouble. At the market entrance, they paid a silver coin and received a stand along with a permit to sell. The location of the stalls was assigned on a first-come, first-served basis. As they walked through the market, Izo noticed that all the good spots had already been taken. Samya pointed out another location, suggesting they try there instead. After setting up, Izo felt that everything was finally in place, while Samya noted that it turned out to be a decent spot. Izo relied on her for support that day, and she responded with a gentle smile. 2 hours passed, yet nothing had been sold. Izo tried calling people over and even demonstrated the products, but it did not lead to any results. In his thoughts, he realized that his background as a programmer had not prepared him for selling goods. A familiar voice approached, asking how things were going. It was the guard from earlier. Izo acknowledged the situation, seeing the humor in his inability to make a sale. The guard then showed interest in buying a knife. This caught Izo off guard. The guard explained that he had been impressed with the knives earlier, and since his own had been damaged, he wanted a replacement. Izo accepted this and handed him a knife. The guard examined it and appeared satisfied, then asked about the price. Izo stated that it would be 5 silver coins. The guard found the price surprisingly low and questioned if it was truly appropriate. Izo had already discussed pricing with Samya and concluded that setting it too high might cause problems. The guard paid the 5 silver coins, and Izo expressed his gratitude. It was the first time he had earned money from something he created himself. Before leaving, the guard mentioned that if the blade performed well, he would recommend it to his colleagues. Izo was confident in the quality of his work. The guard then departed. Samya observed him and wondered if he felt satisfied, and Izo responded with a quiet sense of accomplishment. Another hour passed, making it 3 hours in total, yet no additional customers appeared. Izo began to think that perhaps the people there did not have much need for farm tools. He decided that they should pack up and return home. Just as they were about to leave, a voice called out, asking if they were already closing. When they turned, they saw a group of guards approaching. Izo found it strange, as they had not caused any trouble. An older guard stepped forward and confirmed whether this was Izo's stall and if he had been the one who sold a knife to a guard named Marius. Izo clarified that it must have been the younger guard from earlier, which seems to confirm the situation. The older guard showed clear interest and asked if there were still knives available. Izo was surprised but presented his remaining stock. Without hesitation, the guard decided to purchase all of them. The sudden decision left Izo stunned. The other guards explained that Marius had been proudly showing off his new knife during their break, which led them to come and see it for themselves. They wanted blades of the same quality. Izo calculated the total for the 8 knives, which came to 40 silver coins. The guards were impressed by how sharp the blades were and completed the purchase. Later, as they made their way back through the forest, Samya felt relieved that they had managed to sell everything. Izo agreed and thanked her for helping that day. With all their stock sold, he realized it would take some time before he could produce enough to restock again. At this point, Izo felt confident that he could handle more than just simple repairs and small orders. He decided that his next goal would be to forge a longsword. He also considered that, if he could eventually strike a deal with a traveling merchant, he would be able to expand the variety of goods he could offer. He understood that it was important to personally test the farm tools and axes he created. At the same time, he realized that he should prepare a separate room for Samya as well. Inside the house, Samya showed interest in whether he could make arrowheads. Izo understood that she wanted them for hunting once she had fully recovered. The idea of using equipment similar to what he made seemed appealing to her. Izo accepted this and decided that he would make them for her, which clearly pleased her. After some time, Izo focused on continuing his knife production for the day, planning to move on to making arrowheads afterward. He began by preparing molds using wood and clay, then poured heated steel into them and waited for it to cool. He had Samya assist by sharpening the blades and attaching them to handles once they were ready. At the same time, Izo worked on crafting a large saw for cutting wood and began modifying the axe he had previously tried to sell. Carving the teeth of the saw required patience, and it took him the entire day to complete. The next day, Izo stood outside, facing a tree. He raised the axe and delivered a single strong swing. To his surprise, the tree let out a creaking sound, and then half of it collapsed with that one strike. Both he and Samya were left in disbelief. As Izo looked at the axe in his hand, he could not help but question its power, realizing that if he was not careful, this new life could end just as quickly as his previous one. Afterward, they prepared the fallen tree, cutting it into smaller sections using the axe. Izo called out to Samya, reminding her not to overexert herself since she had not fully recovered yet, and they continued working together. They then used the large saw, pulling it back and forth between them to cut through the wood. As they worked, Izo found the resistance strangely soft, almost like cutting through something much easier than expected. Samya noticed the unusual feeling as well, finding it oddly amusing. Izo reminded her to be careful, as the strain was causing her body to tremble. Once they finished, Izo observed that the work had gone smoothly. At that pace, he believed they would be able to complete everything by the end of the day. Samya observed that work like this would normally take far more time, yet with Izo's tools, everything moved much faster. She recognized how remarkable his equipment was. Izo understood that the ability to create such tools came from the knowledge that had been placed within him. It was simply the cheat given to him for his second life. Even so, he did not want to rely solely on that advantage. He wanted to grow through his own efforts rather than depend entirely on what he had been granted. Still, he remained grateful for the opportunity to begin with such gifts. In his mind, he saw himself as nothing more than a visitor in this world. Because of that, he resolved to use his abilities properly, living a steady life and making sure not to misuse the power he had been given. That night, Samya noticed that Izo was still working. She approached him, drawing his attention. Her thoughts turned to something he had mentioned before, that he had not originally lived here. Izo had acknowledged that earlier, and now she wondered if he planned to stay in this place moving forward. From what she could see, he had already made up his mind. She reflected on everything that had happened since coming here. Even though she had not been able to do much because of her injury, she had still found enjoyment in helping him with his work. Their conversations during meals had been engaging, and their walks together had been something she looked forward to. More than anything, she found herself drawn to watching him work, seeing the focus he had when creating something with his hands. With all of that in mind, she wondered if it would be acceptable for them to continue living together. Izo had already decided to remain in this place, and with that decision came the question of whether she was comfortable staying as well. Her reaction made it clear that she was more than willing, her excitement showing through as she expressed her gratitude. Afterward, Izo finished his work for the night and handed her the arrowheads she had requested. Little by little, Izo began to carve out his own place in this world. Through each small decision he made, both now and in the future, he continued to shape the life he was building. He hoped that this would be the beginning of many calm and satisfying moments ahead. Meanwhile, inside a bar in town, a man spoke with satisfaction about purchasing a knife from Izo. His companion wondered when Izo would return, thinking of buying one for himself next time. Not far from them, a woman overheard the conversation. Curious, she stepped forward and approached them, asking to see the knife they were discussing. Izo handed Samya a lunchbox filled with bread and dried meat. He reminded her that she had only just recovered, so if she encountered any danger, she should return immediately. She understood and set off, while Izo watched her leave and wished for her safety. After that, Izo returned to his work. His first priority was to build up his inventory. From that day onward, he planned to expand beyond knives and begin forging longswords as well. He checked the mold he had prepared earlier to see if it had dried properly. Once confirmed, he split it in half and removed the inner mold. Then he reassembled the two outer pieces and placed them into a barrel filled with sand. After that, he poured in the molten iron. Once the metal had cooled, he removed the clay and took out the sword. He then filed down the rough edges and used a hammer to shape the blade further while it was still hot. After tempering the metal, he sharpened the blade. For the finishing touches, he added a guard and wrapped the grip in leather. Though simple, he also crafted a wooden scabbard to complete it. Normally, this kind of work would require multiple people working in sequence, but thanks to the cheat given to him by the watchcat, he was able to handle much of the process alone within his workshop. Izo carefully carved his signature design into the pommel of the sword, and with that final touch, the piece was complete. The design was modeled after a cute cat he had once seen on social media. With that, the first stage of his longsword was complete. From there, he planned to spend the next few days producing lower-ranked, more standard models of swords and knives in larger quantities. Even though these were his own creations, he continued refining them with care. At one point, Izo found himself holding the sword and striking a pose like a hero. Just then, Samya returned home. Seeing him in that moment left him slightly embarrassed, and he chose not to explain what he had been doing, simply acknowledging her return. She appeared a bit flushed, and Izo noticed it. There was a light sense of happiness in her expression. He realized that having someone waiting at home created a different kind of comfort. Samya shared that same feeling. It was a kind of happiness Izo had never experienced in his previous life. He then asked about her outing. Samya had successfully hunted a tree deer. She had already prepared it by removing the insides and leaving it in the lake so they could retrieve it the next morning. Izo understood and then turned his attention to how the knife and arrows had performed. Samya found the weapons to be very effective. The next morning, she and Izo brought back the tree deer she had hunted and began cutting it up. With her skill in handling the knife, combined with the blade's sharpness, they were able to remove the skin almost instantly and move on to slicing the meat into portions. Once all the meat had been cut, Izo noticed that the knife's sharpness made the process almost too easy. As they continued, the pieces of meat began to resemble the kind he was familiar with. Izo reflected on how, in his previous world, the sweetness of fruits and the ease of eating prepared meat were all the result of people's efforts behind the scenes. While they cooked some of the meat, Izo wondered what had been done with the organs that were removed from the deer. From what Samya explained, leaving the remains in the forest would naturally draw wolves to consume them. Izo understood this as returning what was left back to the forest. As he ate, he found himself appreciating the taste. It had been a long time since he had eaten fresh meat that felt this satisfying. Samya then thought ahead to the next hunt, considering that catching a bird would be a good idea, especially since roasted leaf birds were known to taste good. The thought appealed to Izo. Seeing her reaction, he felt that eating well was an important part of living a slow and steady life. After some time, they brought the remaining meat into the workshop and prepared it to be preserved as dried meat. Izo also began thinking about making smoked meat in the near future. The following morning, since Samya was taking a break from hunting, Izo had her assist him with his work. She began shaping a mold and found the process surprisingly interesting. With her help, Izo was able to build up enough stock once again to take to town. As they approached the town, they were greeted by Marius, who had not seen them for a while and had been concerned. From what Izo understood, the earlier demand had led to his stock running out completely. Marius noticed that Izo had brought swords this time. Another man nearby showed interest and mentioned that he might return later to take a closer look. While setting up his stall, Izo acknowledged the neighboring vendor, recognizing that they would be working side by side for the day. The man accepted this without issue. Izo then asked Samya to make use of the time to buy groceries, specifically salt and barley. She agreed and left to take care of it. With everything prepared, Izo finished setting up his stall and settled into selling at a steady, unhurried pace. After some time, a man approached Izo and showed interest in the swords. Izo handed one over, and the man drew it from its sheath before carefully examining it. After inspecting the blade, the man recognized its good quality. He then decided to purchase 4 swords. The request surprised Izo, and he found himself questioning whether the man was certain. The man explained that he was a peddler. He only intended to keep one for himself, while the rest would be taken elsewhere and sold. Izo understood the situation and began to see the opportunity in it. In his thoughts, he realized that this could become a way to expand his business beyond the town by letting others sell his work in different places. The transaction was completed, and Izo reflected on the idea of traveling merchants. The thought crossed his mind that, once he had saved enough money, it might be nice to travel together with Samya someday. Not long after, Marius arrived with several of his companions. With their purchases, Izo managed to sell out all of his ordinary model longswords. The only items left were the higher class models that he had not yet displayed. When Samya returned, Izo let her know that the knives had already been sold. As they spoke, Samya noticed someone nearby looking around. The figure stood out, a dwarf, which she found unusual to see in that area. Izo recognized the mention of dwarves from his knowledge, recalling that they were a smaller race. Samya reflected that they were rarely seen there. Even for her, most encounters had only been brief, usually when she met them in the forest and guided them toward the main road. Before long, the dwarf noticed both of them and made his way over. His attention focused on Izo, as he sought to confirm whether Izo was the one responsible for making the knives used by the guards. Izo confirmed that he was indeed the one who had made the knives. The dwarf then noticed a knife displayed on the table and showed interest in it. Izo allowed her to take a closer look. She drew the knife and tested it, carefully observing its qualities. After that, she wanted to see the finest item he had in stock. Compared to the mass-produced ordinary models, which were made in larger numbers, the high-class model had been set aside. Izo had intentionally kept it hidden, intending to sell it only to someone he considered worthy. The dwarf, confident that something better existed after examining the knife, waited expectantly. Izo then revealed the sword and offered it for inspection. The moment she saw it, she was visibly taken aback. She carefully wiped the blade with a cloth, bringing out its shine. Despite her small frame, Her movements were precise and steady, showing a high level of familiarity with handling such items. She continued examining every detail, testing the sword thoroughly, while Izo and Samya simply observed her without interrupting. As time passed, it became clear that she had been inspecting it for quite a while. Other customers came and went, yet she remained focused on the blade. Izo began to wonder how long it would take before she finished. Eventually, she returned the sword. Izo's reaction showed a hint of disappointment, as he had expected her to purchase it. Still, he accepted it back without issue. Then, instead of leaving, the dwarf made an unexpected request. Izo found himself confused as she stepped forward and drew attention from those nearby. Without hesitation, she knelt down and asked to become his disciple. The sight of her kneeling left Izo completely taken aback. A few moments later, Izo, Samya, and the dwarf sat down together. The dwarf introduced herself as Riku, expressing that it was a pleasure to meet them. Before Izo had any chance to refuse, she had already prostrated herself in the middle of a crowded street. To properly hear her explanation, they decided to clean up and move to a quieter place. It was also necessary, as Izo did not want Samya drawing unnecessary attention from the public. Samya found the name unusual and wondered if it was a family name. From what was explained, Moritz was not a family name but the name of the smithy she belonged to. Among dwarves, it was common for them to gather with different families and form a smithy, introducing themselves by the name of that workshop. In that sense, she was known as Riku of the Moritz smithy, which Izo came to understand. Izo then shared their own names, including Samya, who greeted her in return. Riku considered his background and noted that he seemed to be from the north. Izo acknowledged that it was more or less true, though due to certain circumstances, he was now working as a blacksmith within the Black Forest. Riku reflected on this, thinking back to why she had never encountered a blacksmith of his level before arriving here. From that, she concluded that his origin explained it. Izo then sought to understand what she truly meant by wanting to become his apprentice. From what was explained, dwarves commonly leave their home smithy for several years to train. Riku, along with her brothers, had also set out from their workshop for that purpose. As part of that journey, they would travel from place to place, visiting different smithies to learn and refine their skills. They would become apprentices under skilled blacksmiths, improving their techniques over time. Eventually, they would return to their original workshop, bringing back new knowledge and creations. After that, they would once again travel back to the place where they had trained. This cycle was part of the dwarven way of life. Izo questioned whether they were not concerned about their techniques being passed on. From what Riku explained, for a smithy, having a dwarf become an apprentice elsewhere was considered an honor. The growth of that dwarf, along with the knowledge and techniques they brought back, would ultimately benefit the smithy itself. Riku then took out a knife. She recalled that a few days earlier, when she had just arrived in the city, she came across that very knife being used by the guards. Izo recognized it as one of the blades he had forged. That connection confirmed everything for her. Since Izo was not affiliated with the city's official blacksmiths and only sold his work in the open market, Riku had instructed her brothers to continue ahead while she remained behind, waiting for him to return. Izo then thought about her brothers, and it became clear that they had already moved on in search of their own smithies to train under. He considered what it would mean if he refused her request. From what was understood, she would simply continue on her own to find another master. The thought of a young girl traveling alone through uncertain paths lingered in his mind, highlighting the risks involved. Nearby, Samya quietly observed Riku without saying anything. Izo found himself conflicted, recognizing a certain naivete in the situation. In the end, he decided to accept her as his apprentice. Samya, however, clearly did not share the same agreement with that decision. Even so, Izo set conditions before allowing it. There were 4 requirements that had to be accepted first. Riku showed no hesitation in agreeing to hear them. The first condition was clear: he would not tolerate any behavior that disregarded personal safety. From that moment on, such recklessness would not be allowed. Riku accepted this without resistance. The second condition was that there were not enough rooms, so renovations would be necessary. The third was that, aside from blacksmithing, she would also help with various chores. The fourth was that formal speech would no longer be needed. He would call her Riku, and she could simply call him Izo. Riku found that difficult to accept and instead chose to address him as her master. From her perspective, as an apprentice, it was only natural to show proper respect to the one teaching her. At that moment, Samya burst into laughter, reacting to the situation in her own way while the others each processed it differently. After some time, they arrived at their destination. Izo pointed out that this place served as both their home and their workshop. Riku was clearly taken aback by the sight of it. Izo then checked on her condition, noting that her luggage looked heavy and that the forest path had not been easy to traverse. Despite that, Riku managed well, her sturdy body making the journey easier than expected. He instructed her to set down her belongings and clean herself up. At the same time, he expressed appreciation towards Samya, recognizing that she had chosen a path through the forest that would be easier for Riku to walk. Samya reluctantly acknowledged it. Later, the three of them sat down for dinner. Izo brought up the matter of space once again, pointing out that there was not enough room. For the time being, Riku and Samya would share the bedroom. Riku hesitated at the arrangement, feeling that it might not be appropriate. Since she had brought camping equipment, she considered sleeping outside instead, leaving the bedroom for the others. Izo saw no issue, as he rarely used the bedroom himself, so nothing would really change for him. Riku found this unusual and began to question the situation, wondering about the nature of their living arrangement. The unexpected assumption led to a sudden reaction from both Izo and Samya, who were clearly caught off guard. Samya strongly rejected the idea, making it clear that their relationship was not what had been assumed. Riku reconsidered the situation, realizing that she had misunderstood. Meanwhile, Izo found himself confused by the idea, even questioning how such a relationship would work in this world. Izo concluded that there was nothing more to clarify, stating in his own way that there was nothing between him and Samya, at least for the time being. The mention of "for now" caught Samya off guard, leaving her slightly embarrassed. Izo noticed her reaction and checked on her condition. Riku viewed the situation differently, understanding it as a group living together like a family within the same workshop. The word "family" lingered in Izo's thoughts. With that idea in mind, he accepted it and lightly patted Samya on the head. He then returned to the practical matters, explaining that until the house renovations were complete, the sleeping arrangements would remain as previously decided. As both the owner of the house and the one in charge, his decision would stand. The two of them accepted this. The following day, they began the renovation work. They polished the wood that had been prepared earlier while also digging holes to set the base for the pillars. Since Samya had gone out hunting, the work was left to Izo and Riku. Even so, Riku was already accustomed to this kind of labor, likely from her time in a dwarven smithy. Combined with Izo's enhanced strength, their progress moved quickly. After some time, Samya returned from her hunt. Izo welcomed her back and checked on how it went. She had managed to take down a large tree deer. Her attention then shifted to Riku, noticing her work. Riku had been organizing lumber, and in the process, she had used the axe to cut through wood with surprising ease, almost as if it were something much softer. The sharpness of the tool stood out to her. Samya recognized the reaction, recalling that she had felt the same way the first time she saw it, finding it somewhat unusual. As Izo listened, he found it a bit strange that Samya had described it that way before. Still, he moved on and explained that blacksmithing work would begin the next day, carried out alongside the ongoing renovations. Riku showed clear enthusiasm for the plan. Before the sun set, they prepared a mold for a less powerful type of blade, continuing their steady progress. The next morning, the three of them brought back the game Samya had hunted and began butchering it. After taking a short rest, they moved on to blacksmithing. They poured the melted metal into the mold they had prepared the previous day. As expected, Riku quickly adapted, gaining experience as she worked. Her hands moved without hesitation, and her pace was both efficient and steady. After a light lunch break, they resumed their work in the afternoon, focusing on making knives. However, there was a problem. The techniques Izo used were based on the cheat he had received. Teaching something like that was not straightforward. Riku called out to him, and Izo decided to be honest. He admitted that this was his first time taking on an apprentice and that he did not know the proper way to teach. Riku understood immediately, accepting the idea of learning through observation. She focused completely, determined not to miss even the smallest detail of his movements. They began by working on a knife intended for mass production, something suitable for ordinary use. As Izo hammered the metal, Riku watched closely, studying each step. Once the blade was heated and placed into water, it let out a sharp sizzling sound. Izo explained that only sharpening and finishing the edge remained. He then turned to Riku, wondering if she had learned anything from watching him. Riku had already picked up on several things. She recognized that Izo seemed able to understand the state of the iron just by sound, yet at the same time he was not using his full strength. She also noticed that the longsword he had shown earlier was different from the knife he was making now. Izo clarified that this knife was meant for everyday use. He wanted her to focus on making something similar, which meant observing the process closely before attempting it herself. He then had her try making one. Riku began the process with precision. As Izo watched, he was surprised by how well she performed, especially considering she had only seen him work once. After some time, Riku finished her knife and handed it to him for inspection. Izo took it and carefully examined the result. Izo quietly reflected that the work in front of him was impressive. It was by no means inferior to the ordinary model he had created earlier. Still, he pointed out that although Riku had done well, there were moments where the sparks had been too intense. That alone showed there was still room for improvement. Even so, he was confident that with time, she would be able to forge something on the level of the longsword she had seen before. Riku felt encouraged by this and resolved to dedicate herself fully to improving her skills. Izo then decided that he would demonstrate the process once more, this time completing every step from start to finish so she could observe it clearly. Watching another person handle the iron for the first time made him realize something. Because of the cheat he possessed, he could naturally understand how to treat the metal, the timing of each step, where to strike, the temperature, and the hardness. Everything came to him instinctively, allowing him to forge with precision straight from his thoughts without losing quality. It was clear to him that this ability did not come from effort or training. In contrast, Riku and other craftsmen relied entirely on their own abilities, striving to master the craft through steady learning and experience. From the very beginning, they built their skills through apprenticeship and constant practice. Izo felt that it might be presumptuous to try teaching something he himself had never properly learned in the traditional way. Because of that, he chose to focus on letting her observe, understand, and take what she could from watching. Riku waited patiently as he worked. When he finished sharpening the knife, the process was complete, and he acknowledged her patience. Riku then examined the blade. From what she saw, it was far beyond ordinary craftsmanship. The level of skill displayed in the work stood out clearly, to the point that even among dwarves, it would be rare to find something made like this. Izo decided to give the knife to Riku. She was surprised by the gesture, unsure if it was truly acceptable. From his point of view, a blade of that level was not something he could easily sell, and now that she had become his apprentice, she was also part of the household. Riku accepted it with gratitude, resolving to continue learning and practicing so that she could one day reach the same level of craftsmanship. Izo responded in a casual manner, encouraging her to keep at it. Around that time, Samya returned and mentioned that the meat processing and preparations for tanning had been completed. As she looked over, she noticed the knife in Riku's possession and was clearly surprised. It became apparent that Riku had received one as well. Later, they moved outside where food had been prepared, and the three of them ate together. During the meal, Riku became curious about Izo's abilities, wondering if he could use magic. It was understood that his magic was limited to simple uses. Samya pointed out that being able to handle both blacksmithing and magic was impressive, and she also mentioned that Izo had a family name. Her attention then shifted toward him, waiting for him to reveal it. When it was shared, the name was Tanya. Riku repeated it to herself, and from that, she naturally began to associate herself with it. This caught Samya off guard, as the connection formed too quickly. However, from Riku's perspective, it made perfect sense. As an apprentice, she now belonged to the same smithy, and taking on the name reflected that. In her understanding, being under Izo meant she would be known as Riku Tanya. Izo recognized her reasoning and accepted that she had come to that conclusion. Riku reflected that she had never introduced herself using a family name before. With that in mind, she considered that if it was necessary, the smithy could simply be named after Izo. Samya quickly understood the idea and began associating herself with that name as well. Izo, on the other hand, found the situation a little embarrassing. The thought of others taking his name in that way felt unfamiliar to him. Samya then pointed out that it would not be fair if only one of them used his name. She began considering whether her own name should change as well. Izo thought about it quietly, recalling that he had been the one who invited Samya to live with him in the first place. In the end, he accepted it. If they were to consider themselves as family, then there was no real reason to object. Both Samya and Riku reacted with clear happiness, and the matter settled naturally. For Izo, who had always seen himself as a temporary presence in this world, it was a small but meaningful change. Until now, he had only focused on his craft, without thinking about leaving anything of himself behind. Yet now, there was something more, something that would remain with him. At the same time, he could not ignore the realization that came from Riku's reaction to his work. The abilities granted to him by the cheat were not something ordinary in this world. Even in his previous life, the level of sharpness and cutting power he could now produce was far from common. In addition, Samya became his disciple, and the group around him gradually grew. With Riku joining, bringing a serious attitude toward the work, and with Samya offering her assistance, Izo gained more time to focus on crafting. As a result, the overall efficiency of the Izo workshop improved. Izo usually visited the free market of a nearby town once a week to sell his creations. During one of these visits, he noticed a familiar face among the crowd. Marius explained that lately, whenever people came asking about Izo's items, the number of inquiries had steadily increased. Izo understood that this rise in demand was largely due to the efforts of those around him who had been spreading word about his work. The peddler also indicated an intention to make a purchase later. Izo's products ranged from knives and longswords to spears, each categorized by their respective rank. First was the type he could produce in large quantities, designed as an all-purpose tool known as the general mode. It was reasonably priced, and its sharpness made it popular even among ordinary households. Next was a higher performance knife intended for those more experienced with handling sharp tools, referred to as the luxury model. It also maintained a reasonable price and was favored by skilled users. There was a sense that these could sell even more if Izo established a connection with a wholesaler. Beyond those, there existed another category. This one was not displayed at the storefront. Izo chose to offer it only after carefully judging the intentions of the buyer. Known as the superlative class mode, it was crafted using the full extent of the unique ability granted to him by Watchcat. Its performance exceeded normal limits and carried significant risk, making it unsuitable to hand over to just anyone. Meanwhile, Izo felt a quiet sense of concern as he thought about the possibility of not being able to sell his goods, uncertain of what he would do in that situation. After some time, Riku spoke to him, noting that everything had been sold out once again. Izo acknowledged this, recognizing that those who had purchased his items had likely been spreading word about them. Riku then raised the point that it might be time to restock their supply of iron, charcoal, and clay. Samya followed by asking whether there was a supplier for these materials, and Izo confirmed that there was. The Watchcat had arranged both the house and the workshop, and although Izo had been provided with sufficient food and materials, their stock had gradually decreased as expected. Izo considered the idea of asking the peddler for assistance. As if on cue, the peddler arrived, noting that Izo was still present. The peddler had heard that Izo would be leaving for the day and had hurried over. Izo felt that the timing was just right. He expressed his appreciation, recognizing that the goods had sold out again, largely due to the peddler purchasing in large quantities. The peddler responded positively, noting that Izo's products had become popular among customers and expressing interest in buying more. Izo was taken by surprise, realizing that if he had known earlier, he could have brought the additional 10 items he had crafted during the night. The peddler observed that Izo was not only skilled as a craftsman but also showed a calculating side. Izo, in turn, reflected on how he consistently worked with iron while also giving proper attention to silver. The peddler found this fitting and revealed a new plan. He intended to establish a proper store in the city, rather than continuing to operate only within the free market. Izo acknowledged this development with approval. The peddler expressed gratitude and sought Izo's input. Up until now, he had dealt in a variety of goods due to his connections in different places. However, he now aimed to establish a store in this town, taking advantage of the fact that, within the walls of a new settlement, there were few restrictions on what could be sold. Izo found the proposal interesting. The peddler then suggested that the shop could handle the sale of the cutlery and weapons Izo produced. Izo questioned whether that arrangement would truly be acceptable. The peddler confirmed without hesitation, having already become familiar with the quality of Izo's longswords. Izo briefly considered whether the peddler had personally used them. He understood that income from the free market was unstable, and at the same time, more people were starting to seek out his products after seeing them in the hands of others. Izo then expressed that he had also been hoping to establish a deal with a wholesaler. He indicated that if the peddler was willing, he would entrust him with that role. The peddler responded with clear approval, expressing gratitude. He then introduced himself as Camillo and conveyed that it was a pleasure to meet Izo. Izo also gave his name and mentioned that, for certain reasons, he resided in the Black Forest. They then exchanged a firm handshake. Camillo showed visible surprise upon hearing this, noting that living in such a place was unusual. Considering Izo's abilities, he recognized that Izo could live elsewhere if he wished, and he observed that it was not uncommon for someone like him to be accompanied by a beastman and a dwarf. Izo then brought up the matter of timing, explaining that wholesale transactions would likely occur about once a week, and asked whether it would be acceptable to inform Camillo in advance if there were any delays. Camillo agreed to this arrangement. Soon after, Izo recalled another concern and raised it before finalizing the negotiation. He explained that he was running low on various materials and asked if there was a place that could supply what he needed. Camillo offered to handle the procurement on his behalf. Izo felt relieved, recognizing how much this would help, and entrusted the matter to him. Camillo clarified that the cost of the materials would be deducted from the price of Izo's goods, and Izo accepted the condition. They sealed the agreement with a fist bump. Izo felt a sense of satisfaction, having secured a reliable way to replenish their materials. Camillo then mentioned that the shop would open the following week and asked Izo to bring his goods when he arrived, before taking his leave. A week later, Riku, Samya, and Izo stood in front of the shop, observing it with clear amazement. The building was large, enough to surprise even Samya. As they stepped inside, they were met with a wide variety of goods. Izo found it impressive. Riku turned her attention towards some rare spices, while Samya noticed an unusual scent lingering in the air. Displayed on the wall were a single knife, a dagger, and a sword. Seeing them presented that way gave a distinct impression of being properly put up for sale, something both Samya and Izo recognized. Camillo soon noticed Izo's arrival and led them upstairs. After a short while, they were seated. Izo then informed him that he had brought knives, a longsword, and short swords for the day, and asked how many would be taken. Camillo accepted all of them without hesitation, which caught Izo off guard. He explained that sales had been going well. Izo acknowledged this, noting that the shop was quite large, and then wondered whether Camillo's name as a peddler had become widely known. Camillo attributed the success to selling goods without distinction, whether to ordinary townspeople, travelers, or professionals. That approach had led to the establishment of this larger store. Izo compared the setup to something like a supermarket. Camillo then brought up a new matter, mentioning a request for a custom-made sword crafted by Izo. He had been uncertain how to respond when the request first came. Izo considered the idea of taking custom orders. He understood that he wanted to be selective about who handled his work, yet he also realized that progress would not come if he refused such opportunities entirely. Camillo asked whether the request should be declined. Izo decided against that, making it clear that he simply wanted to choose the recipients more carefully. Camillo suggested that he could evaluate the requester's skill and personality before informing Izo. Izo found this acceptable. He then added a condition. The requester would need to come to his workshop personally. To reach it, they would have to pass through the Black Forest, a place where wolves roamed. Anyone capable of making that journey would prove their ability. Camillo acknowledged this requirement. As for judging personality, Izo chose to rely on Camillo's assessment. He provided the location of his workshop, instructing that it be shared only with those deemed worthy. Camillo agreed to the arrangement. Izo then turned to Samya and Riku, offering a brief apology as he chose to proceed with this decision. Riku expressed that she had no objections to her master Izo's decision. Samya shared the same view. Izo felt grateful for their support. Camillo simply responded with a quiet smile. Izo then asked about the materials, wanting to know if they had been secured. Camillo confirmed that he had prepared a good amount and guided them further inside. As they entered the warehouse, Izo noticed that it was just as large as the shop. Camillo indicated that this was the stock. Izo was clearly impressed, realizing that all of this had been gathered within a single week. With this quantity, he understood that their supplies would last for quite some time. Camillo assured him that with this amount, there would be no immediate concern about restocking. He then leaned closer and quietly mentioned the price. Izo reacted to how low it was. The cost came to about a quarter of the usual wholesale price. He questioned whether it was acceptable for Camillo to offer such a margin. Camillo maintained a calm expression, indicating that even at that rate, he was still making sufficient profit. Izo accepted this explanation and decided not to hold back. He then considered how to transport the materials, noting that the amount was something he could carry by hand, though it would still be more convenient with assistance. He asked whether Camillo dealt with carts. Camillo indicated that he did not, but mentioned that there was an unused cart he had been planning to discard. If repaired, it could still be used properly. Izo found this suitable and asked about the cost. Camillo offered it without charge. Izo was taken aback by this. Camillo explained that it had no use to him, and that showing consideration to a loyal customer was natural. Izo questioned whether it was truly acceptable and wondered what made him deserving of such treatment. There was a quiet thought about whether there might be more behind the gesture. Camillo clarified that Izo appeared to be a supplier with strong potential for the future. Having someone who could provide high-quality items at a reasonable price was valuable. He regarded the gesture as an investment of goodwill. Izo acknowledged this and expressed his gratitude for Camillo's help. Camillo accepted this without hesitation. After some time, all the materials had been loaded onto the cart, and they were ready to head home. Izo considered that it would be somewhat heavy to carry along the main road, but he believed it could still make it back as it was. Rookie agreed with that assessment. Izo then thought about improving the road a little more. Rookie reflected that doing so would make it easier for people who wished to request items to reach them. Izo found that reasoning sound. At that moment, something drew Samya's attention. She recognized it as a sign from a forest wolf and suggested that they pause and wait for a while. Izo noted that it had been the same earlier that morning, sensing that the wolves seemed more restless than usual. Samya understood the reason, recognizing that it was about the time when they would be having their young. She estimated that in another month, they would likely begin seeing wolf pups. Izo briefly imagined what those young wolves would look like. Rookie observed that the wolves in this forest were unexpectedly quiet and wondered whether they actually attacked people. Samya explained that the forest had an abundance of prey such as tree deer and grass rabbits, so the wolves were not troubled when it came to finding food. She also noted that with both her and Izo present, stronger individuals were unlikely to be targeted. Izo understood that those with strength were rarely chosen as prey. Riku then considered what would happen to someone weaker if they were attacked, and she realized that wandering alone would be dangerous. Samya made it clear that whenever Rookie left the house, it would be better to go together with either her or Izo. According to Samya, the wolves of this forest were unusually intelligent. They showed a level of social behavior that differed from ordinary ground wolves. To survive in this environment, they had developed awareness and adaptability, possibly evolving their intelligence to match the richness of the forest. Samya also mentioned that aside from wolves, there were occasional bandits. Even with her and Izo nearby, there were still dangerous individuals, so caution was necessary. She gently rubbed her stomach. At that moment, Izo recalled something troubling. The black bear that had once attacked Samya was still somewhere within this forest. Even for someone like Samya, a tiger beastman, encountering such a dangerous opponent could pose a serious threat. That thought lingered only briefly before his attention shifted. He heard a sound coming from nearby and instinctively tightened his grip on the cart. Heavy footsteps approached, growing louder with each moment. What emerged was a massive black bear, an overwhelming and unavoidable presence of the wild. Later, with their materials restocked, they began creating new products. As Izo inspected the results, he found that the outcome did not look bad to him. Riku observed that, even compared to the previous items, the new ones turned out well, recognizing that the materials they had obtained were of good quality. Izo accepted her judgment, trusting her assessment, and decided they should continue. They placed the ores acquired from Camillo's shop into a furnace powered by magic, which refined them into steel. This furnace produced almost no slag, and it did not wear down, allowing it to be used repeatedly. Its efficiency was remarkable. Riku remained impressed by how magic functioned in such processes. In principle, their workshop was meant to rely on manpower to carry out its operations. However, having access to a supplier like this felt almost like an advantage beyond normal means. Izo even felt that it was to the point where he could almost apologize to the artisans of this world. Still, he was genuinely grateful as it allowed them to craft detailed work even while operating deep within the forest. Several days passed. Izo recognized that they had reached their production quota, and with that completed, he could finally turn his attention to renovating the house. At that moment, Samya called out to him. Izo turned his attention to her, sensing that she had something to show. She indicated that he should come along if he had finished for the day. When Samya revealed the result, Izo was taken aback. The renovation of the house had already been completed. Even the roof had been finished, and the result appeared well done. Izo expressed his appreciation toward Riku, acknowledging their hard work. However, Riku directed the credit toward Samya's efforts. Izo felt apologetic, realizing that he had not been able to contribute much to the house over the past week. During those days, while Izo had focused entirely on blacksmithing, the responsibility of renovating the house had been left to Samya and Riku. Together, with Riku's experience and Samya's steady effort, the renovation had progressed smoothly and reliably. Izo reflected that completing all of this with just the two of them must have been quite difficult. Riku considered that, compared to humans, they were naturally stronger. Izo expressed his gratitude to them once again. Izo then mentioned that he had asked Camillo to prepare bedding for them next time. After that, he planned for them to work on making the door, followed by the bed and necessary tools. Riku wondered whether they would actually install a door for the room. Izo confirmed that they would and sought agreement. Riku thought about how, in most cases, unless it was the home of a noble, only the guest room or the room of the head of the family and their spouse would have a door, with most families sharing a single room. Samya admitted that she had no experience living in a proper house, so she could not compare. Izo quietly realized that he had been speaking based on the common sense of his original world. Even so, Izo decided that he wanted things arranged that way, with separate rooms for the pupil and for the family. Both Samya and Riku accepted this idea. Samya then asked whether Izo planned to go to the city. Izo decided not to go for that week. Riku recognized this as a day off and began to think about what they should do. Izo responded with a calm expression. Without noticing it himself, ever since Izo arrived in this world, he had not experienced a proper day of rest. In order to maintain a balance between work and life, they had been working without a fixed schedule, continuing their efforts every day. Fortunately, sales through Camillo's shop had been going well. While they had not saved a large amount, they had managed to set aside a small portion of their earnings. Because of this, Izo chose to take a step back and allow himself a proper rest for the week. As they walked, Samya pointed out a spot ahead, suggesting it as a place to stop. Izo looked at it and found it suitable, deciding that they would settle there. After nearly an hour of walking from their home, they arrived at the upper stream of the river. It was the long-awaited slow life, the long-awaited day off. Izo intended to spend this time doing something he had always wanted. He crafted a simple fishing rod using natural materials. The thread they had brought from home, combined with a fishhook shaped from processed rivet, formed a handmade fishing rod. Izo lifted a rock, thinking there would likely be bait underneath. As expected, he found worms. Rumia showed clear discomfort, while Samya displayed excitement. Izo quietly reflected on how differently the two reacted, noticing how absorbed they were in the moment. They then began fishing. Izo guided Samya to let the line out a little more. Izo allowed himself to simply enjoy the calm present. The weather felt pleasant. Coming from a demanding workplace where breaks were rare, he now found himself in a situation where he could eat properly and get enough rest. Even so, the habit of constantly working remained, and it felt as if he still pushed himself without realizing it, even in this world. Taking things slowly and relaxing like this made him wonder when he had last experienced such a moment. Not long after, something suddenly tugged at Samya's rod. Izo instructed her to remain still for a moment longer, allowing the fish to properly take the bait. At the right timing, he gave the signal, and Samya successfully caught a fish. Izo acknowledged her success. Riku then directed that the fish be placed on the ground so they could remove the hook. As Izo watched the two of them, he quietly noticed that after spending time working together, Riku had grown more comfortable speaking casually with Samya. The two of them appeared to be enjoying themselves as they handled the fish Samya had caught. Before long, it became midday. Samya had caught one fish, Riku had caught two, and Izo had not caught any. Izo felt a quiet frustration as, on 3 attempts, he had only managed to pull up driftwood and leaves instead of fish. Samya questioned whether he might be giving off too much killing intent. Izo did not immediately understand what she meant, and the confusion showed slightly on his face. Samya pointed out that his expression appeared intimidating. She then explained that fish were still living creatures, and they remained cautious when they sensed the presence of something strong. Izo considered this but reminded himself that it was still the middle of the day, and there was no need to rush. Not long after, Samya lay down and let out a yawn. Izo glanced at her, and soon Riku also rested, both of them falling asleep peacefully. Izo remained seated, reflecting that this moment was meant to be leisure on a day off, and there was no need to chase results. It was simply a time to ease his mind. After some time passed, Samya woke again, letting out another yawn. She realized that she had not caught anything since earlier in the afternoon. She thought about how fishing was different from hunting. Unlike hunting, it did not allow for setting traps or constantly changing locations, which made it frustrating for her. Izo reflected on the idea of hunting. He then recalled that during hunting, Samya would remove all the internal organs except for the heart. He wondered what became of that heart, since it was never brought back home. Samya explained that she would bury the heart beneath the soil of the forest. Samya explained that when a soul returns, the forest gives rise to new life. Izo understood from this that the heart represented the soul. She further noted that wolves and other animals would come to consume the parts that were not buried. Because of this, some would remain nearby, watching and waiting. Izo reflected on this custom of the beast men in the forest. He quietly wondered that when the time eventually came for him to meet his end in this land, whether his own soul, having come from another world, could also become part of this forest. After that, they moved to a different fishing spot, though it did not lead to catching more fish. The sun was beginning to set, and it seemed like it was time to give up. However, Samya and Riku had already caught 3 fish earlier in the morning, which meant there would be 1 fish for each of them. Even so, Izo realized that he had not caught anything at all, despite this being a day meant for leisure. He began to feel that his dignity, both as the head of the household and as a master artisan, was on the line. He resolved that no matter what, he would catch at least 1 fish. Samya noticed his determination and found it amusing, seeing how clearly it showed on his face. Izo questioned whether it was truly that obvious and felt a bit self-conscious. At that moment, Samya sensed something approaching. Izo also noticed it and steadied himself. He focused, reminding himself to stay calm, knowing that acting hastily would only scare the fish away. With careful timing, he pulled the line and successfully caught one. Izo held up the fish, moving it slightly as a small smile appeared on his face, satisfied that he had finally caught one. Samya found his reaction somewhat awkward, while Riku regarded it as a fine result. Although Izo had not caught much, the 3 of them had enjoyed their time and were able to relax. With that, their day off came to an end, and they prepared to return home. Izo thought about how they would return to work the next day, continuing with both their craft and the house renovation. However, the heavy feeling that usually came before the start of a new workday was no longer there. He found himself looking forward to resuming his life as a blacksmith. It became clear that Izo was genuinely content with the life he now lived in this new world. After some time, they returned home and held a small celebration. Izo acknowledged the efforts of both Samya and Riku, recognizing the work they had done that day. With that progress, they could take a short rest before moving on to the next stage of expanding the house. Their home was beginning to take proper shape, and both Samya and Riku felt a quiet sense of pride and excitement. Each of the newly built rooms had been fitted with a simple window and door. A mattress and a bed frame were also placed inside each room. Samya and Riku now had rooms of their own. Izo adjusted his own space, turning the room he had been using for sleeping into a combined guest and study room. With this arrangement, they were now able to begin living in their individual rooms. Riku felt slightly uneasy, as it was her first time having a room of her own, something she was not yet accustomed to. Samya, on the other hand, turned her thoughts toward planting seeds in the field. Izo considered this and planned to see if they could obtain seeds during their next visit to Camillo. Alongside the house expansion, they also began preparing the land beside the house for cultivation. At present, they relied on the forest for meat and nuts, but vegetables still had to be purchased. If possible, Izo wanted them to grow their own vegetables and move toward a more self-sufficient way of living. Izo reflected that the unsold practice hoes and sickles they had made would now be useful, as they could serve a proper purpose. Riku realized that this would be her first time preparing a field and recognized how knowledgeable Izo was. Samya shared a similar impression, noting that Izo seemed to possess an unusual breadth of knowledge. Izo reacted to that remark, feeling that the description did not need that particular emphasis. Izo's understanding came from a combination of what he had learned in his previous world and the knowledge granted to him after being given a second chance at life. Considering that, it was not surprising that others might find it unusual. Even so, Izo understood that there had been many things he did not know in his former world as well. That night, as Izo prepared to sleep, a quiet thought crossed his mind. It had been quite some time since he had last slept in a proper bed. Ever since arriving in this world, he had been sleeping at his desk. It seemed that he had carried over his habits from his previous life, where resting at a desk had become normal. He could not tell whether that was a good or bad thing. On the outside, his body appeared to be that of a man around 30, yet internally he still carried the experience of someone in his 40s. He allowed himself the thought that taking it easy from time to time was acceptable. The next day, a woman approached their house. Samya sensed her presence quickly and turned her attention toward the outside. Izo noticed and asked what had caught her attention. Samya recognized that someone had arrived. A loud knock echoed at the door, accompanied by a voice stating that Camillo had sent her and that she wished to commission a sword. The force of the knock surprised Izo. He moved to respond while Samya kept a knife ready in case anything went wrong. Izo proceeded to open the door. When the door opened, he welcomed the visitor. The woman asked if he was the blacksmith who supplied weapons to Camillo's store. She introduced herself as Helen. Izo noticed that her voice carried strongly. He confirmed his identity, recognizing her as his first customer, and invited her inside. They took their seats. Izo considered whether she had come alone, and she confirmed that she had. He then thought about the dangers of the forest, but she had not encountered any trouble. Helen explained that finding the place had been difficult, but she had followed the trail of smoke to reach it. She also observed that Izo's workshop had an interesting atmosphere. Izo reflected that the wolves tended to avoid those who possessed significant strength. From this, Izo understood that she had entered the forest and found the workshop on her own, successfully passing the condition he had set. With that, he accepted her request and prepared to craft a sword for her. He then considered what she required. Helen untied and presented her current sword, indicating that she worked as a mercenary. She sought something similar in form but with greater strength. Due to the nature of her work, she rarely had the opportunity to properly maintain her weapon on the battlefield. Even so, the difference between survival and defeat depended on how well one could use such a tool. Izo recognized the weapon as a pair of short swords. As he held them, he noticed numerous scratches and chipped edges, and his gaze lingered on their worn surface. What Izo created were tools meant for combat, true weapons. If he used his abilities to forge them, any opponent, regardless of size, would not stand a chance. That meant people would inevitably be harmed by something he had made. It was a reality he could neither ignore nor avoid. From now on, it was something he had to accept, even if he would never grow accustomed to it. Izo acknowledged that Helen's swords were well made, recognizing the skill of the one who crafted them. He considered showing them to his apprentice, Riku, and proceeded with that intention. Helen allowed it without concern, and Riku examined the blades closely. Riku concluded that they were indeed fine weapons. She understood that if Helen desired something superior, then entrusting the task to her master would be the only option. Helen responded with visible confidence, taking Riku's words seriously. Izo then turned his focus to understanding the intended purpose of the weapon, which momentarily caught Helen off guard. He wanted to know how the swords would be used, as it would guide his work before he began forging. Helen understood the importance of this and decided that rather than explaining, it would be better to demonstrate. They moved outside. Helen drew both swords and began to display her skill. Her movements were swift, controlled, and precise. Izo observed closely, noting her speed. He came to understand that one blade was used to control and pressure the opponent, while the other delivered the decisive strike. Even so, the speed of her movements remained striking. As he watched, Izo noticed something unusual and focused his attention on her condition. Helen realized that demonstrating alone made it more difficult. She then looked toward Izo, indicating that having a partner would allow for a better demonstration, which caught him off guard, along with Samya. Izo considered that if Helen wanted to spar, Samya, being a beastman, would be more accustomed to fighting than he was. However, Helen judged that Izo appeared stronger than Samya. Samya reacted with slight irritation at that impression, acknowledging that while it might hold some truth, it still did not sit well with her. Izo reflected that since arriving in this world, he had not taken part in any real combat. Even so, his body seemed to understand how to move, as if it had been shaped for fighting from the beginning. It was a sensation of instinctively grasping what to do, a result of the strength he possessed. Izo accepted the situation and prepared himself. He considered that Helen was only intending to demonstrate her skill and would not aim to seriously harm him. Stepping forward, Izo faced her directly while Samya and Riku observed quietly. Izo braced himself, hoping the exchange would not be too intense, but Helen showed no hesitation. She moved first, closing the distance in an instant and striking. Izo managed to block the attack, and she immediately followed with a rapid series of strikes. He held his ground, deflecting each one. Helen then stepped back, and Izo responded with a counterattack, which she blocked. Her movements were so fast that Izo perceived them like flashes of lightning. He pushed forward, keeping up with her pace as best as he could. Even so, Izo understood that without the ability he possessed, he would not have been able to move or even perceive her attacks. He would have been overwhelmed instantly. Simply matching her movements already required his full focus. Helen then launched another attack from the side. Izo avoided the strike, though it came close enough to slice through a portion of his hair. Izo came to realize that Helen was no longer holding back and was aiming with real intent. She advanced again without hesitation. After some time, both of them were left catching their breath. Izo noted that he had managed to remain standing, while Helen acknowledged his strength. Izo felt a trace of frustration, recognizing that he had spent the entire exchange on the defensive, focusing only on evasion. Helen appeared amused, admitting that she had intended to end the match within the first few strikes. Few people were capable of facing her thunder sword directly, and she acknowledged that she had become slightly carried away before offering an apology. Izo took this in and felt that he now had a clearer understanding of what was needed. He estimated that he could complete the sword within 2 days and expected her to return after 3. Helen hesitated at the thought of leaving immediately. Izo considered her reaction, while Helen shifted her focus toward continuing the spar after a short rest. Izo understood that if things continued that way, he would not be able to work on the sword. Helen recognized the point and adjusted her approach, instead expressing interest in observing the forging process. Izo reminded himself that the work would take 2 days. Helen then suggested staying there during that time. Izo realized that he had already prepared a guest room with a bed. He glanced at Riku and Samya before coming to a decision, allowing her to stay. Helen reacted with visible excitement, striking Izo lightly. In this way, Izo's smithy received its first customer. After the exchange with Helen, Izo turned his attention back to the remaining work for the day, intending to finish what was left. Samya approached him and indicated that she had completed the burr removal. Izo acknowledged this and had her leave the pieces where they were. Samya then moved on to tidying up and prepared to adjust her arrows. Izo called out to her, recognizing that she had improved in her work, and he expressed his appreciation. Samya responded with a simple, satisfied gesture, her tail swaying lightly. Whenever she was not out hunting, Samya assisted Izo in the workshop. Most of her tasks involved casting and removing burrs. She seemed to find her own enjoyment in the work, and Izo considered that it might be worthwhile to let her try using a hammer at times. Nearby, Helen observed them as they worked. After some time passed, Izo indicated that it was time for dinner. Helen recalled that on her way there, she had been surprised to see an unusually large deer. Samya recognized it as a tree deer and understood that such creatures could be troublesome when angered. Helen took note of this. She also mentioned that, even from a distance, she had spotted a bear. Both Izo and Samya reacted to that information. At the mention of the bear, Samya instinctively held her stomach again. Izo quietly considered that the bear was still somewhere nearby. Helen noticed the shift and wondered what it meant. Izo explained that Samya had once been attacked by a bear and had nearly lost her life. Helen reflected on this, believing that if her equipment had been in perfect condition, she might have been able to defeat such a creature. Izo cautioned against taking unnecessary risks, recognizing that the bear was dangerous even for someone like Samya who was familiar with the forest. He made it clear that if anything were to happen, it would be difficult for them to face the outcome. Helen accepted this and understood the concern. After some time, Izo lightly struck his own face to regain focus. This was the first custom order for their workshop, and he resolved to put everything he had into it. Izo began by casting a magic spell. Helen plans to inspect the progress the following day. For now, she had gone into the forest with Samya to explore and gather materials. As Izo recalled the way Helen had handled her swords earlier, he heated the iron and carefully hammered it, keeping the blade evenly thin while making the most of the materials available. Through the special vision granted to him, he could perceive the structure of the iron at a deeper level, almost like seeing its particles. As he continued hammering, removing irregularities and shaping the blade, the quality of the weapon steadily improved. Izo then decided to test its strength. He instructed Riku to bring an ordinary model short sword, and she complied. He drove the ordinary blade into a tree trunk to hold it steady, then struck it with the newly forged custom sword. The result confirmed his expectations. The durability was sound, and there was no visible damage on the new blade. Riku was impressed by the outcome. Izo then looked at the ordinary sword and realized that it was no longer suitable to be sold through wholesale. Riku considered that it could still be sold after some reworking or sharpening, but Izo chose otherwise. Even if the quality remained acceptable, he did not want to sell something that had been used for testing another weapon. Instead, he decided that it would be reworked and kept for use at home. Riku recognized this as part of his nature, seeing him as a craftsman who held firmly to his principles. Izo accepted that with a small sense of satisfaction. Though he could be seen as stubborn, it did not make him unreasonable. Even if his abilities were something granted to him, he intended to pour all his determination into his craft. In doing so, he felt that he was drawing closer to the kind of work he had long wanted to achieve, and that thought brought him a quiet sense of fulfillment. For the finishing touch, Izo carved a mark onto the pommel. With that, he recognized that the first sword was complete. Riku showed interest in examining it, and Izo allowed her to take it. Riku studied the sword closely, her gaze sharp and unwavering. Izo noticed that she examined it with such focus that nothing seems to escape her attention. He then wondered whether the blade met expectations. Riku concluded that this was not something achievable through ordinary, or even moderate, talent. She reflected on Izo's circumstances, acknowledging that regardless of the reason behind his departure, losing him had been a significant loss to the north. Izo considered this, questioning whether his skill truly reached that level. Riku remained certain in her judgment. Izo understood that the power within his hands was far from ordinary. It did not even feel entirely real. Through using this ability with clear intent, he had come to realize something. This time, he had worked with iron while focusing on durability, which meant the blade would not be capable of cleaving through something like a boulder. However, if he had focused on sharpness instead, such a feat might have been possible. That would have resulted in an unusually powerful weapon. If he were to use materials superior to iron, he began to wonder what kind of result he would achieve. By balancing durability and hardness, he could create a weapon that possessed both qualities. Izo had come to understand this clearly. In other words, if he acted without caution, he would not only influence the path of the user but might also place them in greater danger. If the weapons he created were to become something akin to strategic tools of power, then he would need to consider whether he truly had the resolve to bear that responsibility. Riku called out to her master, apologizing as she wondered if she had said something that caused offense. Izo reassured her that it was nothing, explaining that he had simply been thinking things through. Izo reflected that he should not let himself fall into negative thoughts over things that had not even happened yet. He understood that he would need to keep such concerns in mind when accepting requests, but for now, what mattered most was that he had created something that made Riku feel glad to be his apprentice. That alone was enough for the moment. Soon after, Samya and Helen returned from their outing. They had gathered a good amount of materials. Among them were medicinal herbs that helped suppress festering, along with various bitter and sweet plants. Samya noted that the wolves had been particularly restless that day. It seemed likely that this behavior was connected to the large black bear that Helen had seen. Izo considered this and acknowledged the situation before shifting focus to their meal. He directed a calm expression towards Samya, and she responded with visible satisfaction. Izo quietly reflected on the presence of the bear. It was not only Samya he needed to consider, but Riku as well. He understood that he would have to remain careful to keep them from getting involved in anything dangerous. The following day, Izo continued his work. He focused on forging the second blade for the special order, while Helen observed closely. As she watched, Helen noted how smoothly and quickly Izo worked. His movements appeared efficient and precise. Riku recognized this as expected, knowing that for Izo, working at such a pace was not difficult. When considering whether she could achieve the same, she understood that even dedicating her entire life to the craft might not be enough to reach his level. Helen took in this realization, while Riku remained firm in her belief of Izo's skill. Izo overheard their thoughts and felt a sense of appreciation, though at the same time, it was not entirely comfortable. He knew that much of his ability came from a power granted to him, and being praised so highly for it carried a certain weight. Helen recognized the blade as one that carried a lightning-like quality. Izo acknowledged this and confirmed that both swords were now complete, placing them carefully on the table. Helen showed clear excitement upon seeing the pair. She noticed the distinct presence of that lightning-like energy within them and appeared eager to test them immediately. However, Izo stopped her, noting that it was already late. He explained that she could try them the following day. He understood that he had taken longer than expected and had kept her waiting, so he asked her to look forward to tomorrow instead. Though she initially resisted, she eventually accepted it. Rather than continuing with the testing, Izo turned his attention to preparing dinner. Samya, Helen, and Riku all responded with visible delight. Samya quickly recognized the dish as tree deer steak. The meal impressed them. Helen realized that the raspberries they had gathered earlier were being used in the dish, something she had not expected. Riku also reflected that even in her previous home, she had never had food like this. Izo explained that since he had completed his first custom order, this meal served as a small celebration. Samya acknowledged this and showed her appreciation, with Riku also expressing the same. Izo accepted their words and noted that Riku had supported him throughout the process. Helen reacted in her usual energetic way, offering her congratulations. Izo recognized that this moment had come about because of her request and expressed his gratitude. The following day, they moved outside as Helen prepared to test the swords. She found that the weapon fit comfortably in her hands. The excitement from the previous day had lingered, leaving her unable to rest properly. Izo observed as she began testing the blade, encouraging her to swing it. Helen moved swiftly, cutting through the air with precision and speed. Samya and Riku watched in amazement. After testing the sword, Helen understood its quality, recognizing it as exceptional. She set the weapon down and moved quickly toward Izo. Caught off guard, Izo was suddenly pulled into an embrace. Helen expressed how glad she was to have chosen Izo for the task, and Izo felt relieved that she was satisfied with the result. Helen tightened her embrace around his neck, and Izo began to feel the strain from it. Izo then explained that while he had already tested the durability of the weapon, he would handle any repairs if something were to happen. He noted that she could either visit Camillo's shop or come directly to his home if needed. Their attention then turned to the matter of payment. Izo left the amount up to her, allowing her to decide what she believed it was worth. Helen found it difficult to determine its value. Izo clarified that it did not need to be exact and that she could simply follow whatever arrangement had been agreed upon through Camillo. Helen then offered what she had on hand, consisting of 2 gold coins and some silver coins. Izo accepted this without hesitation, and with that, the transaction was settled. Helen wondered if the amount was truly acceptable, recognizing that it was more than what she had paid for her previous weapons. Izo reassured himself that her former swords had also been well made and that this exchange was fair to him. Helen showed a satisfied expression, and after that, they exchanged a firm handshake. She then took her leave, offering a final gesture before departing. Izo reflected on her strength, recognizing her capability. Samya noted how much effort it had taken for both her and Riku to separate Helen from Izo earlier, while Riku commented on how loud Helen had been. Izo responded with quiet amusement. After that, Izo returned his focus to their usual work. Riku decided to check the number of short swords and long swords they currently had, with Samya assisting her. Then, 2 days later, a sudden turn of events arrived. The moment to confront the dangers of nature had finally come. One day, Samya came running back at great speed, as if fleeing from something, and reached the house. Izo noticed that she had returned earlier than expected and sensed that something was wrong. Samya's face clearly showed fear. She had encountered the large black bear. Izo checked on her condition, and Samya confirmed that she was unharmed. She had escaped before having time to think, believing she had shaken it off. However, she also understood that bears had a strong sense of smell, and there was a chance it could still track her. Izo felt relieved that she was safe, but his thoughts quickly turned to what needed to be done. Samya must have encountered the bear somewhere nearby. If it continued roaming freely, there was a risk of crossing paths with it again at any time. The possibility of Samya or Riku being attacked weighed heavily on him before he pushed that thought aside. Izo made up his mind and prepared to head out. Samya reacted immediately, trying to stop him. Izo took up a spear, judging it sufficient for the task. He intended to deal with the bear if he found it. Before leaving, he instructed Samya to secure the doors of both the house and the workshop. Samya insisted on going with him, but Izo refused. He understood that if the situation turned dangerous, he could not guarantee her safety. That thought left Samya uneasy. Izo reassured her, believing in his own judgment. It was not a matter of doubting her skill with a bow, but rather a decision he chose to face alone. In his mind, he recalled the earlier exchange with Helen. During that moment, he had confirmed that his body would respond correctly in combat. Even when he had restrained himself from striking, the knowledge within him guided his movements as if his body already understood how to fight. Samya remained unsettled, her body trembling slightly as she watched him prepare. Riku also shared the same concern, hoping for his safe return. Izo acknowledged both of them. He held on to the thought that he would not fall and leave them behind. With that resolve, Izo set out to confront the bear. Behind him, the house was secured, and Riku quietly prayed for his safety. Samya looked at her and followed, joining in that silent hope. Meanwhile, in the rain-soaked forest, Izo moved forward with careful awareness, staying alert to every change around him. In his mind, he followed the direction where the sense of danger felt strongest. Normally, he would rely on Samya to watch for threats, but facing something like a large black bear, his instincts, sharpened by the ability he carried, were reacting intensely. The rain worked in his favor. It dulled scents and masked sounds, making it harder for the bear to detect his presence. In that sense, the harsh weather became an advantage. Izo's eyes widened when he spotted something ahead, and at the same time, he let out a quiet breath. He recalled a moment from his previous world, when he had given up his life to save a cat. Now, he found himself standing here, preparing to kill a bear. His body had changed, but his inner self remained the same as it had been back then. The difference now was that he had something to protect. There had been a time when, trapped in the life of an overworked corporate employee, nothing had truly mattered to him. Now, he had a family, and there were people who valued what he created. His gaze sharpened as he steeled himself. He found the large black bear and brought his body into position. The bear stood before him, observing him closely. Its presence carried clear hostility. Izo prepared himself for the confrontation, facing it directly. The bear moved first, stepping toward him with heavy intent. Izo accepted what he had to do. There was no hatred toward the creature, but he understood that it had to be dealt with. The bear lunged forward and swung its massive claw. Izo avoided the strike, recognizing both its size and speed. Even a single glancing hit would be dangerous. As he evaded the attack, he shifted his footing to the side and drove his spear into the bear's body. Izo tensed when he realized that his strike had not taken effect as expected. The wound was too shallow. The bear roared in response, and as Izo watched, it swung its claw again. This time, the blow landed, sending him crashing into a nearby tree. He forced himself not to lose focus. This was not a place where he could fall. He quickly pushed himself back up, steadying his stance and gripping his spear tightly. As the bear closed the distance again, Izo seized the moment and drove his weapon toward its neck. The bear cried out in pain. Izo's expression sharpened further as he recognized the chance to end the fight. He committed himself fully, determined to survive in this world and protect what he now held dear. With that resolve, he thrust the spear deep into the bear's chest. The bear collapsed. Izo watched closely, noting that it no longer moved and showed no sign of breathing. He considered that the fight had ended. He pulled the spear free from its body. As he did, he recalled Samya's earlier remark about how a clean cut could feel almost unnatural. Looking at the bear, he understood what she meant. After that, he lowered himself to sit and took a moment to rest. It had been his first battle where his life was truly at risk. Now that the danger had passed, he became aware of the trembling in his body. Although his ability had played a significant role, the outcome had been narrowly decided. He examined himself, noting the bruises and scratches he had sustained. Even so, he had managed to avoid any broken bones. Izo stood again, considering what to do next. He had taken a life with his own hands. If possible, he wanted to make use of it, to consume the meat and return the rest to the earth. However, he did not know whether it was safe to eat. In the end, he chose to carry it back. After some time, with the rain still falling, Izo lifted the bear onto his back. Even with his enhanced strength, its weight was immense. Still, he pressed on, noticing that the rain had begun to ease slightly. For Izo, returning home quickly was necessary before encountering any other threats such as wolves. He estimated that he had already covered about half the distance. He suddenly stopped. Something had caught his attention. In the next moment, someone grabbed his leg and pulled him, only for it to be Samya, showing the more instinctive side of herself. Izo reassured her that he was safe and that the bear had already been dealt with. Samya looked at him closely, wanting to be certain. She checked him again, making sure he was truly unharmed. Izo acknowledged that he had suffered some bruises and impacts but nothing severe, and that no bones were broken. For a brief moment, they simply looked at each other before Samya's emotions surfaced, and tears began to fall from her eyes. Izo was taken aback as she cried in relief, then held onto him tightly. He responded by gently patting her head. Nearby, Riku approached and hesitated, unsure if she was intruding on the moment. Izo made it clear that she was not. Riku then explained that Izo had taken longer than expected to return, and since Samya believed he would have been back already if everything had gone well, they decided to go out and search for him. Izo recognized the danger in leaving the house under such conditions. Riku, however, understood that there was no stopping Samya once she had made up her mind. She added that they had been tracking both Izo's scent and the bear's, and as both grew closer, they had prepared themselves for the worst, ready to confront whatever approached. While waiting in hiding, Riku had observed that Izo and the bear had appeared together, making it difficult to tell what had happened at first. Izo understood their actions and expressed his appreciation. Riku directed that gratitude towards Samya instead. Still held close, Samya received his thanks. By then, the weather had cleared. Izo suggested that they return home. After Samya had settled down, the three of them worked together to carry the bear. Along the way, they decided to leave it near a lake for the time being and planned to return the next day to retrieve it. Once they returned home, the exhaustion hit Izo all at once. Riku decided to take care of preparing dinner while Izo went to rest in his room. When he removed his clothes, the number of bruises covering his body became clear. Samya quickly came to check on him, concerned for his condition. Izo reassured her that he was fine. Samya remained uncertain and continued to check on him. Izo explained that he simply needed to clean himself. The fatigue weighed heavily on him. He told Samya to let him know once the bath was ready. As he waited, he leaned against her, and before long he had fallen asleep. Samya was momentarily surprised, realizing that he had dozed off while resting on her. She steadied herself and gently patted his head. By the next morning, Izo felt a strange softness around him. As he woke, he quickly sat up, realizing that he had not cleaned himself the night before. He noticed that both his bed and his clothes had been changed. At that moment, Samya entered the room, and the two acknowledged each other calmly. Izo understood that he had fallen asleep completely. Samya confirmed that he had slept deeply. She explained that Riku had been concerned he might get sick if he remained unclean, so the two of them had taken care of wiping him down and putting him to bed. Riku then entered the room and saw that Izo was awake. Izo expressed his apology to both Samya and Riku. Riku told him that his clothes had already been washed and that there was no need for him to worry about it. Riku began to mention something about Samya calling out to him during the night, but Samya quickly stopped her, not wanting it to be shared. Riku did not see any harm in it. Samya then guided Riku out of the room and reminded Izo to come once breakfast was ready. Izo accepted this and prepared to follow. With that, another day began. A simple day filled with the usual routines. A quiet continuation of the life they had built for themselves.